and welcome to 5-Star Conversations, where we talk with hoteliers making a positive impact on our industry. And today I'm joined by Anthony Metcalfe. Welcome, Anthony.
Hi, Brendan. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So Anthony Metcalfe is a seasoned hospitality professional with over a decade of experience in luxury hotels and resort management. He's currently serving as the hotel manager at the Capella Sydney, and he plays a pivotal role in delivering world-class guest experience at one of the city's most prestigious destinations. His tenure at Capella began as director of rooms during the hotel's pre-opening phase, where he was instrumental in overseeing key operational departments, including front office housekeeping and Auriga, the wellness experience. His expertise in executive leadership, strategic planning, and guest satisfaction ensure the seamless operation of this ultra-premium property. Before joining Capella, Anthony held leadership positions at Hyatt Hotels, including operations manager at Hyatt Regency Brisbane and front office manager at Park Hyatt Sydney. His experience spans brand transitions, large-scale renovations, and complex pre-opening projects in diverse markets from Australia to Japan. His ability to navigate operational challenges, align teams with brand standards, and enhance the luxury guest experience has been central to his success in the industry. Anthony's journey began with roles at Grand Hyatt Melbourne, Sofitel Queenstown, and Park Hyatt Sydney, where he developed a deep understanding of luxury service and guest relations. His hands-on leadership style, combined with his expertise in budgeting, occupancy management, and relational development, has made him a trusted figure in the industry. With a commitment to excellence and innovation, he continues to shape the future of luxury hospitality in Australia and beyond. So welcome again, Anthony.
Thank you. That was a great introduction. Thank you, Brendan.
You're welcome. It was actually a previous guest of mine, Scott Baer, that said I had to get you on. He couldn't speak highly enough about you and your leadership of him and your mentorship of him at the Park Hyatt Sydney. And to me, that speaks strengths. And once we get into questions in a minute, we'll talk about that. But, you know, when I asked him those questions, you were that inspiration for him. So
very flattering.
Yeah, it's good. So Anthony, the first question I always like to ask is, did you choose hospitality or did it choose you?
I don't think I'm alone in this realization that it probably chose me. I grew up in a hospitality family. My parents were always in hospitality. So admittedly, I actually grew up thinking I'll never do it because I know how hard it is after seeing my parents do it for their whole life and continuing to do it now. My sisters were much wiser. They went off into animation and film. And despite my best desires, I actually wanted to become a pilot.
Okay.
I got my first job and I really realized that it's where I felt most comfortable. So pretty quickly I realized that I wanted to continue a career and went straight from high school to hotel school in Queenstown in New Zealand. And there's never been a kind of wobbly moment since, and however many years, 15 years since then, where I thought that maybe there was something else that I might want to do. So very much I think it chose me. But then once I realized that I wanted to do it, I think I was actually quite fortunate because so many people that I went to high school and university with still struggle with what do I really want to do with my career. So I think actually to know that that's what you want to do is quite a fortunate thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. A lot of us still struggle with what we want to do when we grow up.
Exactly, yeah.
And you said your parents were in hospitality, in hotels, restaurants?
My dad very originally in hotels, and my mum and dad actually met my dad when he came back to New Zealand after working in hotels in London, owned a number of restaurants, and my mum owned a delicatessen. And my dad, the kind of meet cute was my dad used to go and buy all of the baklava that my mum would make in her delicatessen and then on-sell it in his restaurants. And I think that they fell in love at that point. So they then went on to run big restaurants and catering companies in New Zealand. And still to this day, they have a small luxury lodge in New Zealand that they run. So I don't think that they will ever not work, fortunately and unfortunately, but I think that they have that same passion for it that I do.
And look, I think there's a lot of people that I know of now. I mean, years ago, I was just thinking about my grandfather, you know, because 65, retired, you know, lived another 10 years, dead, really didn't have anything. Whereas I've got an uncle who's just turned 83, works 6 days a week. For him, that's it. Like, he doesn't want to retire. Maybe take it easy a little bit, but he knows if he retires that will be the end of him because he gets his sense of purpose from what he does.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, it's a lifestyle for them. I think more than just a job. It's part of really their whole personality. for better or worse, but I think for better in this case.
Definitely. Anthony, is there a funny, it doesn't have to be funny, or memorable experience from the early part of your career that probably cemented that love? You were talking about, and I understand wholeheartedly. I mean, I grew up in retail and my dad always, I grew up in retail from the point when when my dad picked my mum and I up from hospital, he actually had a delivery to make on the way home. Like that was it. So from then on, and he always, when I'd go with him to suppliers or whatever, they say, "Oh, is Brendan going to take him?" And he's saying, "No, no, he's too smart for that." So you sort of went through that bit as well. It's like, maybe I shouldn't do hospitality. Is there something that really cemented that love in the early part of your career that guided you?
I think what I always enjoyed when I was younger, I kind of joke sometimes with my team that I think I grew up sitting on a pot in the corner of a kitchen. My mum was always the chef and dad was always front of house. I think what I loved was there was always so much movement and so much spirit of generosity around hospitality. And I can think as a kid, and even now when I go home to my parents, there's always someone in the house. There's always some sort of entertainment happening. Like it really is a lifestyle. I think if you are fully immersed in hospitality, I think for me, where I got my first real passion for it, I had lots of jobs through school and high school, and I actually got a job when I was at high school in Christchurch before I went to university, working with Wagamama Restaurant Group, which was just starting in New Zealand at the time. And this was, quite some time ago when Wagamama was very sort of cutting edge and cool. Mm. And going through that pre-opening process of opening this restaurant, I think that's really where it all came into crystal clarity for me that it was something that I really wanted to do. I fell in love with the process. I fell in love with the branding. I fell in love with the whole synchronicity of working in large scale hospitality. So I was always quite clear-eyed at that point that I wanted to work in hospitality. I had my first job in hotels when I went on internship to Grand Hyatt Melbourne, and it was very enlightening. And I thought for a long time that was the style of hotel that I wanted to work in. Fantastic hotel, but what I mean by that style is in big, really busy, huge numbers. I loved the thought then of that really intense energy of volume. But then as my career went on and as I went into different locations, I think probably where I am now in this less than 200 rooms, that's probably what my sweet spot is now. So I think it's always a bit of an evolving passion for it. I wouldn't necessarily say that I have a memorable story that was really the aha moment. There's been lots of stories that have come from it since that have maybe solidified it, but I think it was just that general feeling of excitement that went into working in a really large hotel like Grand Hyatt Melbourne, and then the continued style of hotel that I've worked in. There's always been something that's been very fascinating about them.
That's interesting. So from Grand Hyatt, did you move to Park Hyatt Sydney, or was there a step in between?
So I was on internship in Grand Hyatt, and that's where I started at Bell Desk. And I remember then I really wanted to learn more when I was there. So I don't even think this would be legal now, but I volunteered to work the 6th day free of my week because I just wanted to experience every part of the hotel. So I would move departments kind of every 2 days while I was there. I'd be in Bell Desk, and I was in concierge, and I was in Grand Club, and then I do my extra day in communications. But it was really good because I left with this really strong knowledge of what I wanted to do. And up until that point, I had always thought that I wanted to be in F&B because that was where my proximity had always been to hospitality. When I finished my internship, I went back to Queenstown to finish my studies. And that's where I worked at the Sofitel in Queenstown, which again was totally different. I mean, had gone from nearly 600 rooms. I think the Sofitel in Queenstown's maybe like 70 or 80 rooms. I can't remember. But that was my first taste of really very close, high contact service with guests. We had a lot of Americans, a lot of Australians that would visit. And I think that's where I kind of fell in love with that smaller style of service. But then it was that I went on to Park Hyatt in Sydney after my time at the Sofitel in Queenstown. And it was there for a long time, better part of 7 or 8 years. I was at Park Hyatt in Sydney.
That's great. And as you said, it's a similar, 155 rooms, very high level of service.
Yeah. Very formative. I joined Park Hyatt just as we had completed the big renovation that they did of the hotel there.
Yep.
Again, that real sense of excitement. And that was when there was kind of the mining boom was really taking effect in Australia, and it was a very prosperous feeling and a deeply fascinating hotel. And especially as somebody young and new to the industry, the exposure that you got in that hotel at that time especially was really quite remarkable. and in the roles that I've progressed through there. So it was, yeah, very exciting starting in hotels like that had so much energy.
Yeah, that would be good.
Mm.
I think somebody told me, I think it was the director of engineering at the time, that Gina Reinhardt used to stay in the suite all the time and had a bank of computers. I think he mentioned in relation to needing to deliver more power or something in the room.
Right. You know, there's a maybe there's a book somewhere in my future with all of the stories that I have from my time, but there'd be a fairly large number of chapters dedicated to that hotel experience of things just like that.
100%. Yeah, I think everyone's got a book,
Yeah, for
good
sure.
and bad
Yes.
stories, lots of stories. Speaking of people,
Mm.
is there a particular person that inspires you? Like, well, it could be your parents, could have been one of your early mentors.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really lucky to have a lot of mentors in my career and continue to have. I mean, there's a couple of answers probably to that question. I think definitely my parents. I think of them probably an outsized amount in terms of decision making and when it comes to career and being in the environment that I think is going to be holistically very good for me in the long run. There's a lot of consultation that I would have with them, especially with my dad, given that he has experience in hotels as well, and it's probably one of my fondest memories is I really wanted to do a project that I think that they felt quite closely involved with the journey of as well, which has been Capella, because I came back to Sydney for this project and they've really had a lot of deep interest in it, and they're quite connected with what I've done here, and also with my team through them coming and seeing the hotel. So it feels very close in that sense. In terms of a career, I mean, as I said, lots of different mentors. I mean, my current general manager has always been someone that's been very supportive of development. And certainly my previous general manager, Saray Carey, who is the general manager of Hyatt Regency in Brisbane, is someone that I would reach to as probably my first point of contact whenever I need some pretty sound and candid
Mm.
advice. We've got a really close friendship that's come from working together. And actually, it was quite a serendipitous sort of relationship that on my internship, she was the then director of sales and marketing at Grand Hyatt Melbourne. So I always had this kind of brief connection to her, and very serendipitous that you then end up working extremely closely with that person again in future. For me, I mean, I've always looked for in a mentor probably similar traits to what you have with your family. You just want someone that is going to speak honestly, give you a true reflection of reality, and the advice that you go to them with. It might not always be easy to hear the answer, but someone that is going to tell you exactly what they think is the right thing for you. So for me, that's always been something that's deeply important in that mentorship. So very fortunate, as I say, to have lots of different people. And I mean, it probably sounds quite cliched, but I learn a hell of a lot from my team. I'm lucky I've had a long-standing team. I've got the same team that I've had since pre-opening. I think as you watch them grow and develop into their roles and achieve really wonderful success, you do get a lot from downwards relationships in the sense of talking to your team and getting consultation and support from them. So they would be up there as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. On that note, I mean, what is one of the best pieces of advice that you believe you've ever been given?
I steadfastly think the best piece of advice that I was ever given, and I give this advice quite regularly, is when I was at Park Hyatt, my EAM, and he's also a mentor for me as well. At the time was Andrew Ashdown, who has just finished his role as general manager of Park Hyatt in Seoul. I was in this kind of crisis of career, I suppose, where I wasn't sure. There was a great opportunity that was opening up when I was an assistant manager to move into a different team, which was guest services, which at Park Hyatt was a really robust, and it was a very kind of interesting space. But I had in my mind always had a very prescribed kind of plan of, you become an assistant manager and then an AFOM and then an FOM, and that's sort of the ladder that you go up, which I think everybody has the belief in. And as I was kind of talking to him about should I apply for this role, he said to me very honestly, one day when you're hiring a front office manager, you're going to look at the list of candidates that are in front of you and you're going to say, do I want to hire the front office manager that has only ever done something in front office, or would I rather hire the front office manager who has gone and been an assistant manager, moved into other departments, whether it be housekeeping, whether it be guest services, and has then come back to front office and been a front office manager and has such a breadth of skill, and hands down the best advice that I could have taken, because yes, it was a slightly more surreptitious route to kind of get back in that direction. But what I learned from it was really quite significant. And I think as well, I would say that's one of the strongest pieces of advice. I had always thought in my mind that I would only ever work in really ultra five-star hotels. And for the most part, that's been where my career has taken me. But coming back from Japan through COVID, when the opportunity came up in Brisbane, I'll be honest and say it's something that I hadn't ever really seen myself living in Brisbane. And it started initially as a temporary. I was working for the Hyatt Australia team, and I was just there to help with the opening of the hotel when they took it over. But through COVID, ended up becoming something a little bit more long-standing. I firmly believe that I wouldn't be able to do what I do now if I hadn't experienced a different style of hotel, because you learn the master of your skill, I suppose, when you are in much more confined financial spaces where there's a lower rate and you're looking at volume and you're looking at how do I maximize experience with maybe a little bit of a shoestring budget. Because then when you're in a position where you're in a hotel, like Capella, where, okay, you have a much, much higher ADR and you have a lot more to be able to spend on experiential things and managing a bigger team, it just makes you a little bit more conscious about the decisions that you make. And I think it's really balance of experience. That advice has pushed me towards those sorts of things, because I don't think that I would have been so willing to come out of my comfort zone had I not received that advice.
I like that. That's really good advice, isn't it? That the breadth of experience working across different properties. Going back to your internship, your willingness to work for no charge and just get those experiences, I think just shows that's really what is required in hospitality. From all the guests that I've had, all of them from Simon McGrath to, Michael Johnson or even Adrian Williams, they've always what I've got out of all of those conversations is that when there's been an opportunity, they've put their hand up and said, look, I'm willing to give it a try. I may not have ever worked in food and beverage, but if you give me some basic training, I'll do anything.
Throw me in there. Yeah.
Yeah, throw me in there. And those experiences have just opened doors,
They're hard, right, at the time. And I think I'm the first person to probably say realistically at the time, it's not without challenge. And in all sincerity, the opening that I did in Japan was not really somewhere that I really wanted to work in Japan, but that wasn't necessarily the first choice of location, because I knew it was going to be a really, really complicated project. But it was the opportunity that was there for me. And in hindsight, it was definitely the right opportunity for me, because I think that old adage of smooth sea doesn't make a skilled sailor is probably very true in hospitality, that you really have to go through a little bit of the really tough times in order to then be able to prepare and prevent in those future ones. So whether that's in challenging market conditions, but also in those experiential pieces where you do have to say, actually, this is not necessarily what I wanted to do, but if I dive into it and I take something away from it, then, okay, all the better for it in the future.
Yeah, very true. Anthony, we're going to sort of move into some questions about the industry and where it's heading. Is there a trend in the industry that either excites you or makes you a bit nervous?
I think from my perspective, probably what makes me a little bit nervous, I think overall the growth of the industry makes me very excited. I think what makes me a little bit nervous is, like I touched on before, I think I've seen both sides of the industry. I've seen a very big, high volume, it's a numbers game versus an experiential game. And then the majority of my time has been based in more of the experiential space of the industry. Where I probably get a little bit nervous is about the overuse of things like lifestyle brands, and I probably take a little bit more of a traditionalist view in this sense, where I think if you're going to call a spade, you call it a spade. I think if you're going to be a four-star hotel, be a four-star hotel that does it justice of being a four-star hotel. Much to the same breath, if you're going to be a five-star hotel, be a five-star hotel. And I think that there's probably a little bit of a shift in the market where there's a hell of a lot of five-star hotels, but are we all necessarily singing the same song of what a guest really expects it to be as a five-star hotel? So it's actually not as much criticism of the industry. It's maybe more a criticism of what makes me nervous is about a shifting guest expectation of what is a five-star experience, because the more blurred that line becomes, whether it's less service or more service, the harder it is to meet that expectation. So I think we just find ourselves more so in a little bit of a guessing game when it comes to what is a guest genuinely expecting when they come to stay, and what's that piece that we're then held accountable for. So I think lifestyle is a really important trend in hotels, but I think the capitalization on calling everything a lifestyle brand or a lifestyle offering, I think does risk clouding market perception a little bit. And I think when we talk about what is market longevity with hotels, and when I know one of the things that we touched on before was about motivating a workforce to dedicate their career to this industry. I think if we're not clear ourselves as an industry about where are we positioning each part of that into brands and star ratings and all those sorts of things, it does make it a little bit more confusing for people to get into, because there's working in a hotel and there's working in a hotel. There's big differences between some properties and some structures. So I think for me, that's probably not so much an emerging trend. I think it's a trend that's been around for a while. It is one that does worry me. And I think coupled with that, my biggest concern is, again, maybe a bit of a traditionalist view. I do get very concerned when I see a lot of automation that is based around autonomy. So where you're removing a colleague and you're introducing self-service check-in kiosks in the wrong environment, I think it really risks the structure of the brand. I'm very, very pro technology in hotels, but I think there's still a lot of things that we don't quite get right that we have technology for at the moment that our attention might be best served at addressing before we start trying to answer a question that nobody's really asked yet. So I think that's probably where just sort of becoming a bit more hands-off, maybe that's the thing that worries me.
Yeah, no, they're two really great points. I mean, I might be right or wrong, but I think brands are responsible for a little bit of that clouding of
Completely.
your
Yeah.
lifestyle. When is it Marriott's now got 32 brands, I think, and
Yeah.
Sofitel 30 brands, and when you
Right, it's the same. Yeah.
yeah, when you talk to them, it's like, okay, so where does Mondrian fit? Is that above the Sofitel or is it below a Sofitel? And I know guests get confused, right? It's like,
Yeah.
so you're right, setting those expectations is difficult.
It becomes quite confusing when you work in, from my own experience, when you work in those brands, because again, where does what you do fit into the greater puzzle that exists as a brand? And that's
Mm.
probably one of the appeals for me of joining Capella, is that it is linear in the sense of there's one
Yeah.
standard that we achieve to. So I appreciate the prescription of things like that, with whether it's Capella or Four Seasons or Aman or Mandarin Oriental, those sorts of brands where it's very much we know exactly where we sit in this space, and that's what we completely predicate our existence around. It's not necessarily to criticize the need for all of those brands, because as a consumer, I also stay in, the Marriotts or the Hyatts or the Accors of the world, but even for me as a consumer, I still sometimes get a little bit confused of, okay, am I going to stay in this hotel and have this experience, or is it this hotel and it's this experience? I don't think it's necessarily helping our cause of overall wanting to make the industry a little bit more sustainable.
Yeah, good point. And I think to your point on technology as well, like, there's a place for it, but you're quite right. In a luxury property where service is the key,
Mm.
then I mean the guests have an expectation. A good friend of mine is a lecturer, hospitality lecturer, and he always talks about when Qantas introduced the kiosk, and he's the highest level member. He's like, I don't want to use a kiosk.
Mm.
Like I've achieved this status, and I would like somebody to actually help me check in. And I get that. And I think it's not a one size fits all approach.
No.
To your point, I think that as a brand we need to be clear on what our value is
Mm.
to the guest and what our proposition is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, very
Yeah.
much so.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things that when we think about, I mean, the burning question is obviously always AI, and any panel presentation that you go to or any discussion that you participate in, there's always a question about how do you think AI is going to affect the experience of the industry in the future? And
Yep.
it's really, really warranted. But I think that the way that I try and consider technology, and CSIRO did a presentation in the hotel not long ago with CEO Circle about AI. And I mean, firstly, there had been people who'd been studying AI since 1980. I didn't realize that it had such a long tenure already in sort of educational scope. But what was a very interesting comparison, I think it's very relative for us in hospitality about technology in general, is that essentially we're just going through a revolution in terms of a cyclical period in time where there's always a shift in the way that our workforce engages. And it happened, with the Industrial Revolution, when we started going from handheld tools into actually, machine mechanisms. It happened in the advancement of computers, where we started, using our heads more than our hands, and started thinking about integration technology and Wi-Fi and all those sorts of things. Really, I think where we're going now is just an integration into emotion-led revolution. I think people recognize that technology is going to improve. And I was thinking about this just last night as I was in my apartment. Everything's automated now on my phone, right? Turn off all the lights, turn the Apple TV on, do whatever you want basically on your phone, control the air conditioning. That's really useful. But how does that apply into hospitality? I think if you can carry over features like that, people still want the emotional contact. I think the artificial intelligence and those sorts of things are really useful in a certain function, and back of house and rostering and all those sorts of things. That's where it's great. From a guest perspective, I don't think that we're at a point that they really want us to break away from contact. I think make some things faster, absolutely. Make some things easier, 100%. But end all contact, I don't think is the right answer, because I think that risks quite a lot of what we have built the industry around.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. It was James Nesbitt. His philosophy was that as technology increases, the desire for human contact also actually increases
Yeah, I think so.
in a different way, as you said. So, guests are happy to do some things that are convenient. There are other things where it's like, no, I just want to pick up the phone and talk to somebody. I want to go down to the desk because I know that it can be solved. And there are very simple examples. I got a text message from someone this morning asking a question. Now I could have spent 10 minutes typing a text back. I just rang them and we just had a conversation. I said, look, and he said, look, I'm great. You did, I only text you because I didn't know whether you were available.
Mm.
But there will always be situations where it is more convenient to have that face-to-face contact, and you know that the problem's been looked after, and you can look at the person and you can feel comfortable. Coming out of COVID, phone calls to hotels increased because people wanted to know about the hotel's policy in relation to cancellations, cleanliness, all that sort of stuff. They weren't comfortable necessarily getting an email back saying, this is our standard policy. They wanted to talk to somebody about it and ask those specific questions. So
I think people also find it from a guest perspective. I think there's a great level of catharticism in sharing your emotion with people as well. Sometimes that's negative, but more often than not, it's positive. That if you as a consumer, you walk away from an interaction when you say thank you to somebody that was a really wonderful experience. I loved it. Lunch was amazing. Thank you so much. You also leave feeling quite buoyed by the reality that you've had a positive impact on someone by sharing that. So I think until such time as that cathartic feeling of expression is ceased, which I don't think will ever happen, I don't think that you can completely replace what we do in the industry with automation, because people still want that more and more, probably actually, is to your point. People do want that connection. So yes, taking the laborious pieces of what we do out of it, 100%. And I think there's been a lot of gradual steps. I mean, even if you think about how we used to do credit card authorizations and you'd manually write it out and send it through a fax, and like all those sorts of things are examples of where technology is really making life easier and more straightforward. And I think that's what we have to do. I think that it's quite a complicated operating space sometimes in hotels, particularly in luxury hotels. I think using that technology to make it a bit more straightforward will help.
I agree. If we looked forward, I suppose, 10 years, what do you think the industry might look like? And is there anything that we should probably be doing now to sort of get ready for that?
I think that the next big question for our industry, and I think it's a number of industries, but hospitality would be one of the big three I think that's affected by it, is I think that there's a lot of superficial loyalty that exists at the moment in our industry. And I think the next big question that will start to come more led from the commercial perspective than perhaps the original decision that was made when loyalty programs were introduced. And let me first preface this by saying the value of loyalty programs is not going to change. You have to have that, and I think it's incredibly important. And perhaps from Capella's perspective, I'm a little bit more acutely aware of the impact of having and not having a loyalty program as a business. I see the value very much on both ends of that spectrum. But what is meaningful loyalty? How are you really engaging with a guest that is actually building a deep connection with your brand and going out of their way to drive their revenue power or their spending power to you because of a whole number of factors? And I think when I say the ending of superficial loyalty, I think it's a very transactional exchange at the moment. I think that's probably where we have created a bit of an imbalance of, if I spend this much, I get this much. This is what my loyalty is worth to you based on a dollar amount that I have spent with you. Or if I, am associated with this airline partner and your hotel, then I get a bonus of this much. Are you actually to us any more loyal as a customer, or are we as a hotel brand any more excited or genuinely, and I think that's the big part of this here, which goes to my point originally. I think there's going to be more need for emotional contact. Are we genuinely that interested to welcome you as a guest, where you are someone that maybe is not actually that loyal to us? I mean, at what point? And I see this at the moment. Traveling, I was just in Europe last week and staying in a large brand hotel, and they had a board up at the front desk that said, today we've got 32 platinum members, we've got 13 titanium members, whatever the terms were. But basically, just FYI, these are all the other people that are here that are important. So you're not that special because you're one of a number. So for you then as a consumer, not that I'm a elite ambassador or whatever the rewards program was, you probably look at that and go, am I actually that valuable to this business, or am I just another number? So we've been having this conversation a lot. We're a part of a quite broad hotel alliance network at the moment, but I think it's probably a question that a lot of our similarly sized competitor brands that we compete with, being, your Amans and Rosewoods and those sorts of Four Seasons type hotels, ask themselves is, how do you actually genuinely recognize loyalty? And how do you make sure that the loyalty that you're capturing is a rational loyalty? Because rational loyalty is not valuable to us anymore. I think irrational loyalty, people who are diehard to your brand, like what Aman used to have, but I think maybe they've perhaps lost a little bit of that with the whole concept of Aman junkies, where people go out of your way to travel around the world and stay just at your hotels. How do you foster that? Because that's the valuable loyalty. Yes, if you're a corporate guest and you stay 150 nights a year at our hotel, yes, you're loyal, but would you be making the same decision if you were paying for the accommodation bill yourself? Probably not. So what's more valuable to us in the long term is someone who will come and spend $50,000 on 5 rooms for 10 nights and have dinner in your restaurant, or someone that travels very frequently. So I think it's an interesting, and I say that very much from the perspective of small luxury hotel groups. But for our industry, I think, how do we recognize actually really financially and irrationally loyal guests to you? That's going to be, for our part of the industry, the most important question for the next 10 years, because I don't think that there's going to be an explosion of new brands. I don't think there's going to be it's certainly not at this point. I think that we all start now to compete a little bit more in a similar experiential space. And for Capella's not really a hotel brand. It's an experiential brand, and we're a collection of experiences. That's where we see ourselves, but we're growing rapidly. We're opening 4 hotels this year and another 10 in the next 2 years. So we need to start capturing that essence of loyalty a little bit more effectively, because as our hotel count grows, so too does our value, and we need to make sure that that's actually returning on itself. So I think for us, definitely that's a really meaningful question, because I think we've answered the question of mass loyalty and commercial exchange. And yes, it works very well from a P&L perspective to have these monstrously large loyalty programs, but does it really drive any massive incremental revenue to you? Now, are we reaching our point of capacity where their value is going to start dwindling, and do we need to be ahead of the curve a little bit more with that?
That's a really interesting point, Anthony. Even in the larger brands, from my point of view, it's a diminished loyalty. I mean, everybody's got one form of membership with the brands, and it often depends. If you're staying on business, then you're not paying for it, then you're quite happy to stay at this hotel. But if you are paying, then you'd stay at a different hotel. I think what we're starting to see with the big brands is that level of personalization, so that it's not just, you stay X many room nights, you're this status, and this is the commercial value. So they're starting to, I mentioned it, Accor are doing it, Marriott are doing it, being aligned obviously with the tennis, Accor with Accor Stadium, giving you, front row seats at particular events. They're trying to differentiate their loyalty programs from the ones that are just purely, as you said, like flybys. It's like tap, 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 you get this certain level of points. Everybody's a little bit over that. So we are looking for something different. And I think, going back to that, it's something we've been talking about for years. We're going to conferences in the 90s where we were talking about personalization.
And I think you have to be realistic when it comes to personalization. I think there's parts of the big brands that have the ability to do this, but as a whole, if you take Accor as an example, how many thousands of hotels they have across the world. It's a very successful operating model of a major hotel group. how feasible is it to really set the expectation that personalization is going to be something that is possible? Because you have 5,000 hotels. How many members do you have, and what percentage of them are elite? What is really meaningful personalization in that space? And I think that loyalty program structure will always exist because I think it meets a value need of perhaps a certain type of client that is choosing to stay there, and very much recognize that that's the principle of a loyalty program. I think my point is about, as experiential brands, how are we recognizing loyalty, and what does the action of that loyalty actually look like on the ground, on property? And that's
Yes.
where it
Okay.
comes to using AI in a really intelligent way, where you're combining a CRM, you're combining your PMS systems, and you're combining all of the data that we know we collect about our guests, but actually turning it into action in a way
Yeah.
that your team doesn't need to create the most interesting amenity they've ever come up with every single day of their life, because you do get fatigue from that. You do get fatigue from the experiential piece. So that loyalty principle has to exist as a broad spectrum, but
Mm.
for smaller or more kind of ultra premium hotel groups, what are we doing
Yes.
that is actually really genuinely meaningful? Because I think when you're paying, and if I use Capella as an example, we're probably the lowest priced of all of our Capellas, but circa $1,000 a night with us. If you're in our property in the Maldives, Patina in the Maldives, and you're paying anywhere from $4,000 a night, do I really care if I get breakfast included or not, or do I already expect that? Like, what does that loyalty look like to me? And is it someone that knows all of the details about me personally from all of my hotel stays, that actually imbues them into my stay experience in a really natural and unobtrusive way?
Mm.
Not making a big experience of, we know that you like almond milk and oat milk and strong flat white. It's just what naturally comes to me.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think it's kind of for us that evolution of that loyalty program, but um, it's more about making sure that the implementation of it is done in a really natural way. Because I think you're right. I think the branch out of what they've done with Australian Open and partnering and making it more interesting and exciting is fantastic. But it's always, because of the volume of it, you have to be realistic that it's always going to be prescriptive. It's going to be something that is not really individualized as much as maybe we would want it to be.
Yeah.
So and I think it is a real challenge, because getting people motivated by it. I remember we did this at Hyatt when the example first came of there was a guest who, I think they had stayed more than 500 nights at the Grand Hyatt in New York. So they were a really, really loyal guest, and they had become a lifetime diamond member, I think is what it was at the time, before it used to be Gold Passport. And they had written a letter to the corporate team, this guest, to say, thanks so much. Being lifetime diamond means a lot to me. I'm about to retire, and I can use this for personal trips and travel, and I see that benefit there. And the corporate team then went back and said, okay, we actually want to do something really personalized for this guest to say, thank you, well done. 500 nights is a lot. That's a year and a half that you've lived in our hotel. But the only preferences they had on file were one from, and I remember this one was from Park Hyatt Sydney, was that they liked a flat white. One was that they liked a foam pillow. The other was that they prefer a non-smoking room, and they like a room that has a corner aspect. So 300 nights plus a year, probably, sorry, 500 nights plus a year and a half. And they had four preferences on the guests. And that started this process within Hyatt of the GEM program and meaningful experiences and all these different things. But the challenge then was, how do you motivate your team to take down what is an actual preference? What's something that people actually like? Just because I
Yeah.
order a gin and tonic once because I crave it, is that actually what I feel like? And so
Yeah.
you'd then end up going around all of these hotels, and I would remember every time you'd sit down in a hotel, someone would come up to me with a mojito and go, "Oh, we've organized a mojito for you because you love a mojito." I'd only ordered it once, I think, at a resort in Thailand. So the intention's there, but the execution can be really, really, really hard to get right. So
Yeah.
I think you can only do that in smaller groups where you have a little bit more hands and eyes on guests. And I think making sure that that's realistic is important.
Yeah, really good points. And I think it comes back, just tying it all back together. It's having a good team.
Mm,
Technology can help,
mm,
but one of my previous guests talked about, from a technology point of view, he said we may have that guest preference in the PMS now that they like Diet Coke. But he said, back in the 80s, it was the concierge that knew that.
yeah.
The information was still there. It was just in a different place.
Mhm.
So I think we still need really good stuff. To be able to, as you said, work out whether that one mojito means that they love mojitos, or it was just, it was a really hot day and that was going to be the drink that was
Yeah.
their choice for
And,
that day. So
and I mean, like, I applaud Hyatt because I think they were a real champion at making that change. This was 2014, but they put a really big focus on it, and they motivated an entire corporation to get behind this drive. But the challenge, I think, is that the easiest way to recognize what a guest's preference is to ask them or to have a conversation with them. And I think that's where you have to put the training, is actually teach your team how to, and this is one of the challenges that we have here, in the hotel, especially because we don't wear name badges, is actually training your team to have a conversation and introduce yourself and say, I notice you're having a mojito. Is it something that you enjoy often? And actually try and ask open-ended questions to get to the answer, because a lot of it is, yeah, the guest has ordered a mojito, so that must mean they like them. Box ticked. There's my preference collection done for the day, that for us as leaders in the industry is the big challenge, is making sure that people stay motivated by that.
Yeah, that's a good point. What is your hope for the industry, Anthony?
In Australia, I think my hope for the industry is that it starts to become more of a really take off again. So I suppose my hope would be that we recognise that we have, as a very large contributor to the Australian economy, a very strong reliance on a short-term migratory workforce. That my hope would be that we can perhaps see a little bit of change to help make that a little bit more of a permanency for some people. Because if I think of the 350 plus people that we have in the hotel here, I wish I could sponsor all of them. I wish I could sponsor, of the ones that need the support to be here long term. They're very talented, very skilled, and they want a long-term career in this industry. But there's a lot of obstacles that I think we put up as a nation to allowing that to happen for people who are already here. So I think the impact is actually pretty limited. And I think the reality is that they're not taking the job that an Australian would otherwise want to do necessarily. So we need that support. So I think my hope for the industry is that we do probably get a little bit of a louder voice at the table, and that we have a seat at the table to be able to participate in really strongly talking about what do we as the hospitality and accommodation sector in the industry need. Because I think our voice sometimes gets a little bit crowded out by other parts of the tourism industry, especially when it comes to airlines and things like that. I think that we lose a lot of our say, and I just don't think the support is there. So my hope is that the government, in whatever shape it takes into the future and long-standing, is able to perhaps see the value that we bring to the industry, because we employ a lot of people, we train and educate a lot of people, and I think we give a lot of people life experience that would otherwise be missing. And I think you can always see the difference between someone who has had an experience in hospitality and who hasn't. I think it grounds you. So I don't think that there's a hesitation to continue the way that we are, but I would love to see that we can create a bit more permanency for people who come to Australia to work and add a lot of value back into our industry.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Totally agree. Anthony, as we get ready to wrap up, the last question I always like to ask is that what advice would you give to somebody who is either just starting their career or contemplating a career in hospitality?
I recognize probably a bit of irony in this, given that I'm relatively young, I think, for the different roles that I've had. But I think whatever I've done, I've tried to do for as long as I possibly can. I think that there's a bit of a syndrome at the moment of new entrants into the industry feeling as though they need to accelerate very quickly. And I think that there's been perhaps a little bit of a false narrative set around the feasibility of that. I think it's to your own detriment if you don't give yourself enough time to really learn and master as best as you possibly can the very tangible skills at a base level in the industry. I think that when you really work in hospitality, and when you work especially in big hotels or luxury hotels, you've got to know pretty well what most people do. You might not need to know what their job is inside and out, but you need to be able to really exert enough time and energy into learning what somebody that you might come into contact with does, and you yourself mastering as best you possibly can all of those different traits. Because if your long-term ambition is to move into a leadership position, it's very hard to manage people if you don't have any idea about what they do on a day-to-day basis. And I do see a lot of leapfrogging And ultimately, the hardest part of that leapfrogging that I see is that there does come a certain point in time where it does catch up to you when you don't know what you're doing, and that imposter syndrome can sometimes be a little bit crippling, I think, for some people. So I think just take time. I think that it's an industry that you can have as a career, and it sounds again super cliched. I definitely don't see it as a race. I think that you know when you're ready, your confidence comes when you're ready, and people just perhaps don't devote enough time to just nurturing and nourishing their own development in each of those roles.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I love it. Anthony, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I've really enjoyed it. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Likewise, it was really wonderful to speak with you as well.
Thank you.